Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather video for today, June 7th, 2024. Today, we're going to be talking about models and, of course, a little bit of climatology, since that's something that I feel like needs to be brought up about right about now, since obviously the questions are kind of arising right now. Will this hurricane season really be active or not, especially given all of the inconsistencies and questions surrounding development in the early season, specifically over the next several weeks in June. We're gonna get to all of that in today's video. Glad to have you along. Let's get started. Starting off with the National Hurricane Center page. Over the next 7 days, nothing expected in the Atlantic, and this is part of the reason why I decided to bring up today's sort of topic that I really want to talk about. It's not that activity is not expected in the next 7 days. Is that right now it just really doesn't look like there's any confidence for anything occurring over the next week. And the same remains the case in the Eastern Pacific. So both basins quiet right now, but I guess that could very well change very soon. Taking a satellite look, though, of the Atlantic, you could see it remains quiet. Lots of cloud cover over the Caribbean. Lots of moisture in the Caribbean that will rise northward. Whether it is a tropical system or not, it'll rise northward into the United States and the Gulf, and especially Florida as we head into next week. It doesn't need a name to produce heavy rainfall and gusty winds. And that's really something that I want to kind of write home, is that we always talk about how impacts wise people tend to take more seriously that we need to categorize something as an actual name or category in order to maximize the urgency for the impacts they could cause, when sometimes it's just heavy rain and gusty winds, which is the same thing that tropical cyclones produce, but not always are systems that will produce gusty winds and heavy rains gonna be tropical systems. And so regardless of whether or not we will get a tropical system forming somewhere in the Gulf next week, there will be heavy rain spreading throughout the Caribbean, the Gulf, and especially portions of the Southeast next week, once again, as we get tropical moisture to rise up. And that'll probably be the case anyways, once again, regardless of if it's a tropical system. But in terms of tropical activity actually occurring, still not too favorable right now. We could take a look at the upper level winds to show that there's lots of strong upper level winds, and you could really see that especially with all of these wind bars that you see in the upper levels. Not only are they tight and close together, but they're also stacked and all moving in different directions in change in the atmosphere, in different levels changing in the atmosphere of winds. Basically, the winds in the upper levels are going all over the place, and they're going all over the place very strongly. Very indicative of strong upper level winds in the Atlantic still. And once again, until we get this to relax, we're really not going to get too much of development occurring in the Atlantic. Although there are some signs of relaxation. You could especially look here, maybe in the MDR, we have a lot less, if you will, of these very strong wind bars. So that means lot less in terms of strong upper level winds. This is something that we want to see a lot more of over the next several weeks if we want to see relaxation of the upper level winds in terms of being more favorable for development. And another factor too, obviously there's wind shear, and then there's Saharan air as well. You can see that there's Saharan air actually out there in the MDR right now, though. But this is more, and I'll continue to say this throughout the entire rest of the season, as long as we have this Saharan air in abundance. This is more typical of the early season. It's part of climatology, keyword climatology, that we have a lot of Saharan air right now that kind of plagues the MDR. It's a source of dry air in the mid levels of the atmosphere that comes from dusty air off the continent of Africa. And once again, it's more typical of the early season, and it does obviously choke off development in terms of tropical cyclones forming, especially out here in the MDR earlier on. But really, either way, it's one, as I said, it's part of climatology, and usually as climatology of the season continues, the Saharan air mass, number one, slowly becomes less in intensity, and it continuously shifts to the north as we get closer towards the peak season. And that's why we really start to look at development here in the NDR on average more towards later July into August, partially also because of sea surface temperatures too. But bottom line, it's all part of climatology. And it's just how things work. It's not always that we're going to get development out here. And especially in the early season too, we tend to not look at development too much in this region anyway. So as right now, once again, nothing to worry about in terms of that. Taking a look at the models though, let me actually reset that to the beginning. And we're going to talk about why, there's a little bit of inconsistency right now. Of course, just going to scroll through the GFS right now, at least from the 12Z run. You see they actually have a pretty potent amplified wave that moves towards the Caribbean. Does almost seem like maybe it tries to get its act together a little bit, but probably won't. It's probably not anything to worry about at all. But then watch what happens, especially as we get towards the week out time frame. We start to notice this huge mess, this giant mess. What is this, you're asking? In the Gulf of Mexico, and this is indeed part of the pattern that a lot of the models indicated, that generally we would start to get more of this cyclonic turning in the lower levels. So basically, we would start to have a Central American gyre, which is what we call it. We call this lower level, broad, low level turning that occurs over the general area of Central America. And this is very typical of this time of year in June that we tend to get this. But this year, at least with this case scenario, if you look at the GFS, it kind of looks like that sort of Central American gyre pattern shifts northward and almost becomes a Gulf of Mexico gyre, because really it's just this huge mess that the GFS has. And you can see they try to consolidate some sort of areas of vorticity. Part of that comes from convective feedback bias that the GFS tends to have, so I really wouldn't pay attention to these concentrated areas of vorticity that they have. But in general, notice that the GFS is really not confident in any sort of concentration over one area. We just continuously have this huge mass of where there's a whole bunch of stretched out vorticity in the Gulf of Mexico. And I'll actually take this out to the end of the run, all the way out till, the fantasy range, especially. We really don't like to go after this point, hour 168, because that is a week out time frame. That's as far as the NHC goes. And that's even farther than the forecasts that we typically look at when it comes to hurricane tracking with the cones of uncertainty. But, just for once, just to see what the GFS has all the way out to the end of the run, which is 384 hours out, and that is 16 days out from now, which will be June 23rd. And even then on the GFS, just look, nothing really tries to consolidate that is anything of noteworthy. We do see maybe at the end of the run something happens, but it's not really consistent. I'll just take a look at the previous model run to show you what the GFS had. Very different scenario from what they have towards the end of the run for the 12Z run. I think the bottom line that I'm trying to hint at, well, one, this is really far out, but two, there's just a lack of certainty. There's a lack of consistency in the models that the GFS has, especially if they're showing some sort of huge stretched out thing this big. It's part of a Central American gyre too, which to point out as a caveat, and some people did mention it to me as well, the models tend to be a huge headache when it comes to trying to depict these patterns. So that could possibly be part of the picture as well. But I think I just want to point out, let me actually take a look at the European. This is the EC Fast. This is still the European, but it just brings out the latest European model runs faster. I'll show you even on the operational run of the European, only goes out to hour 240. And very interesting that we get that the GFS had this huge area of, disorganized mess in the Gulf. And you could really just see it. Look at all this vorticity stretched out. But then we just take a look at the European in contrast, and they show nothing that is similar at all to the GFS whatsoever. There's just a lack of consistency in the models, and it's giving everybody a complete and total headache right now. And because of that, a lot of people are really starting to question whether or not this pattern, this window that we're having that is upcoming in the Atlantic, might even produce any sort of concrete solid system in the Atlantic. surely it may not seem like it, especially um, after all of the models so far. Granted that a lot of the stuff is still a week, 2 weeks away, so the models are still very iffy about everything that's going on, but you really see it. There's just a lack of consistency on the models. There's just a lack of coherent evidence that we're really confident on one area potentially trying to form. I'll actually take a look at another model too. We can take a look at the Canadian as well. They have a little bit more of a consistent sort of formation occurring, especially as we get towards hour 240 in the Northern Gulf. That looks a little bit better, I guess you could say, compared to something like this. And you could actually see it does somewhat line up with something that the GFS has, but we just take a look at the European and how it matches up. Not that one, this one, hour 240 on the European, and just compare that to the CMC. There's just, you could just look at so many different models, and almost every single one of these models has a different solution. So, as I did mention, that's leading to lots of confusion on Twitter. Some people are already starting to, as expected, and as I expected, people are thinking, "Oh wait, you know what? Pack up the season. It's done. Not expecting development over the next 2 weeks, so we'll probably uh, it'll probably just not be as active as a hurricane season overall as everybody was saying." And I get some of that doubt to some extent. Some of these people bring up some certain points about that that maybe I could understand, but in general, just kind of goes to the idea that once there's not any sort of certainty, especially even in the early season, people already are quick to jump to conclusions, especially when we have a huge mess that we have in the models right now. And to the point of the early season right now, we're not really seeing much activity. Even if this does not amount to anything, to that, I point out this, and this is climatology, really basic climatology, honestly, in the Atlantic. And most importantly, where are we right now on the climatology graph? This is what we typically see in terms of tropical Atlantic activity in the Atlantic throughout the hurricane season. And this is where we are right now in early June. This is where we are. We barely see any sort of activity in the Atlantic. We really don't start to see a rapid increase in the Atlantic in terms of activity on a climatology basis, not even till early August. And we don't even see the peak of activity occur all the way till September. And you notice from that time, from when we get to the peak, we have a rapid increase in activity. It goes basically from 0 to 100, quite literally. And before then, there's just really not that much that happens on a climatology basis. So the point that I want to make is, even if we don't have activity right now, we're still in the early season months. We tend to not even get our first name storm anyways till we're really only expected to have about one or so name storms till we get to July, and only around two or so before August. So even if we're not that active in terms of early season activity right now, it really does not mean much for the hurricane season, especially because we're here and we quite literally have more than 90% of the season on a climatology basis to go. And not only that, but to bring up the example about the early season, let's actually bring up some more notable hurricane seasons from the past. And here's the thing, all of these seasons did not really have that much activity earlier on. One of these years I want to bring up, 1998. This year was pretty notable for Hurricane George in Alabama and Hurricane Mitch in the late season, monster late season Caribbean storm. And look at that. And also 1998 too. We started in late July. The first named storm, Alex, formed at the end of July. And that year in total ended up at number 10 in terms of the most amount of ACE in a hurricane season on record. We literally ended up with we literally ended up in the number 10 spot in terms of most ACE on record in the Atlantic hurricane season, and we only started in late July. So there's one example for you about how little the early season really means. Another season that is very notable and more recent than 98, 2004. We all know about this season, Hurricane Ivan, Charlie, Francis Jean, the whole Florida mess that year. When did we start? Alex as well. The same naming list from 1998 to 2004. That started literally in August. And all of our activity quite literally happened between a 2 month time period in August and September, which are the two main peak months of the season, including October sometimes. But even then, October was not even that active too. It was a peak concentrated year, and it was really active, and we did that without the early season. Another notable year, and this one is the most recent, 2017. We all know how 2017 went. Harvey, Irma, Maria. Look at that. Even in 2017, yeah, there was a little bit of early season activity. It's not like 1998 or '04 where it was dead. But we still had activity there, but even then, the activity was very weak. And you could even see by all these storms, barely any of them amounted to anything, especially in terms of impacts. And even for a while in 2017, most people thought that the season would not even be as active as it was. It was not until we got to August that everybody really started realizing that the season could potentially be more than what was forecasted, but it was already too late because we would only be weeks away from having storms like Harvey, Irma, Maria, and guess when they all happened? In the late August to September timeframe. And we go back to the climatology map, notice when all of that activity really happens. It is August and September. So the bottom line is that even if we don't see activity now, it's part of climatology that we're not as active now, but trust me, come peak season, especially this year, expect lots of activity to come. And it's part of climatology anyway. So I think the main thing is to don't get so worked up even over the models being so inconsistent about activity now and automatically jumping to conclusions that suddenly nothing will form. And because nothing will form, the season won't be as active. It definitely could still very well be as bad as everybody's saying, or maybe not. Maybe they might be right. We'll see. There's still a lot to be determined. There's still lots of, other factors that sometimes also play into a season too. So we'll have to see. But the bottom line is watch out for the tropics over the next several weeks because things will change. Trust me. We might not see much now, but I'm telling you, in a few weeks when we do see stuff, we'll probably see lots of it. With that being said, though, thanks for watching. Stay safe. If you like what you saw today, please, I encourage you, as always, like, comment, subscribe, share with family and friends. Share your thoughts in the comments as well. If you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to respond back. Stay safe. Have a blessed afternoon, blessed evening, a blessed rest of your day, and even weekend as well, even though we'll be posting tomorrow. Peace, love, and kindness to all of you, and we'll talk again very soon.